Well, hey everyone. Hey, welcome back to another fun episode of Temple Executive Coaching and our podcast of That Guy and That Girl. We got a new girl with us today, providing leadership solutions to small and medium-sized business and business owners. And I'm joined by, and I can sincerely say this, a very good friend of mine, Holm. Ann and I have known each other. We've collaborated for a number of years. But wait till you hear. Listen to this, Ann's background, all right? Well, first of all, very simple. Ann is a professional certified coach, but she's specializing in executive and organizational development coaching. But in addition to being a certified master practitioner of the Myers-Briggs Type Coach Indicator, she offers the Type Coach online assessment, which not only assists with professional development, but also team development. In addition, she is certified to assess and coach emotional intelligence. One of these days, I'm going to have some sort of an accolade like that. But prior to coaching, Ann has 25 years of experience in applied brain science and is co-authoring a book on the topic of applied brain science now. Ann has both a Bachelor of Arts and a Master's of Science from the University of Michigan, with a focus on psychology in brain science, also in language. You know, I kind of stumbled there, Ann. The reason I stumbled is because you went to a real school, University of Michigan. So that kind of caught me off guard. I wasn't ready for that. But and I couldn't be more excited because Ann is also one of our leadership and development coaches at Temple Executive Coaching. And she and we are currently collaborating on a couple of organizations together. So the things I just read, folks, are things that she's actually applied and she's gotten positive results. So, if I had a button and for the crowd applause, I'd hit it. So this is,
Thank
there you
you.
go. And hey, thanks so much. A topic that you and I have talked about quite a bit, both as practitioners ourselves, but with joint meetings, is this thing that kind of floating around. We need to get more employee training. We need to develop our employees, and they're almost using these things synonymous,
Yes.
within themselves. And then that's where I've seen kind of your head tilt a little bit like, hold on here. Do you really know what you're asking for? So let me ask you something. What is the difference between employee training and employee development?
That's a really good question because a lot of times they are, as you pointed out, used synonymously. And they really are they're brothers or cousins, but they're not the same.
Mm,
When you talk about employee training, you're talking about procedures,
mm,
manuals. This is how you do it.
mhm,
Some very specific how-tos.
mm,
Um, when you're, and that's sort of a basic definition. Well, and as we talk, I think we'll, unpeel more of
mhm,
these layers. The other position is employee development, and employee development has to do with getting your staff to know their own strengths and blind spots, communicate better, create engagement. So
mhm,
it's this people development piece is what
mhm.
employee development is. And you just don't get that in employee training, because employee training is really, the buzzword would be how to.
Okay.
With employee development, it's more how will I, or how will we.
Mm, okay.
So
All
uh,
right. So kind of what I like what you said there, you said kind of the employee training is the how to,
yeah.
right? So it almost seems like the training stops when you've covered the how to's. Then the training is
Yes.
done until there's a
Hmm.
brand new how to
Yes.
work this software, how to present this product.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
done.
Yep.
Is that
Yep.
it?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It very much has an endpoint. When you finish the items in the manual, or you've learned the
Mhm.
product brochure, when you've learned how to do something specific within the company, like this is how we do
Mhm.
billing, this is how we, this is how we get our, I mean, even as simple as this is how we, you get paid. It's just, it's
Mhm.
very, very specific. And when it's done, as you said, until
Mhm.
the next thing that comes up that has to be trained, or you redo a training. So, um, back in my old days, I used to work in hospitals. And so they,
Mhm.
every single year, we would repeat certain training around
Mm.
infection control, and we would talk about other sorts of procedures in the hospital, and it would be the same thing again and again, but it was
Mhm.
training. It was
Mm.
training. It wasn't. It had nothing to do with developing me or any of my fellow people on a personal level, or how we learn about ourselves and how we do our jobs better. It was strictly about the procedures that we needed to follow in the hospital, and that's the training piece of it.
Mm.
So,
So that being the case, if we're
yeah,
on the development side,
mm,
like you said, how will I?
yes.
Does employee development have any impact on the employee training at all?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. Yes, it does, because the employee training is the how-to.
Hmm.
The employee development is the how will I. So
Hmm.
you will get more out of employee training if you've also done employee development. And I'll give you an example.
Okay.
So let's say that some of the procedures
Hmm.
in an office are very specific. So the protocols are really specific. So let's say in the billing department, there are some very specific protocols to trace fraud. Let's just
Mm.
say that
Okay. Okay.
exists. And so that means you've got to really follow some procedures, you have to look
Hmm.
at some details, et cetera. Now, if you're an individual who's not a very detail-oriented person, you may not follow that procedure. Yeah, me too. I'm
Yeah.
not. Yeah, yeah. So
I'm
when
out.
I know when I think about myself in a fraud department, I think, oh my gosh, I would just, I would die, because it's so detail oriented, it's so
Hmm.
protocol oriented, and that's not my natural strength. Now, if I was working in that job and that's something I had to do because I had to do it,
Right.
I would then have to say, okay, and this is where the development piece comes in. I'd have to say, all right, I'm not usually that great at this, so I'm going
Hmm.
to need to pay extra attention. I'm going to need to come up with some
Mm.
strategies to follow this protocol, because I have to, because that's what the
Hmm.
training says.
Mm.
And I know myself, knowing that this is going to be a challenge for me. So you put those two together, you got the
Hmm.
training, and then you've got this awareness about yourself, and you
Mm.
take that awareness into that particular piece of the job you have to do at that moment. All right. If I didn't have that awareness, I would be like, this is baloney, Uh, he's fine. He did, I mean, I might not
Mhm.
follow the steps that been asked to do if I tend to be not a step-oriented, protocol-minded person.
So, and then on the opposite side, Ann, what if I'm an
Nice.
individual that doesn't have, I'm going to use two words here, self-awareness, okay, a lot of
Yes.
emotional intelligence. And to me, I got to bulldoze my way because this is fraud and this is step A and this is step B. And come hell or
Right,
high
right.
water, we're going to get C and D.
Yeah.
And, and I'm pushing through
Mhm.
almost with, kind of this mentality of,
Yes.
did you do it? I mean,
Yes, it is. Yeah, with increased zeal, or a bull in the china shop kind of approach, where I'm gonna get it, and I'm gonna, take it down, and there's no listening. Maybe you don't
Mm,
realize that you're not listening, or maybe you're missing something because you've already come in with your theory that this is the way it's kind of playing out. And
mhm, mhm,
it's the self-awareness piece that allows you to take a step back and say, how I approach this matters, because if, let's say, I'm wrong,
mhm,
then where does that leave you? So the development piece allows you to do any job you're trained for better, because you know how you'll interface with those particular roles.
So it's kind of how am I going to respond if I understand, Ann,
Yep.
if we continue with the fraud investigative part, how am I going to communicate that maybe I might need to dig a little deeper, some sensitive topics, or some questions that I don't come across? Do I get it, or am I still in left field?
Right. Well, yes, that's exactly right. You're just it's people skills. It's how it's your self-awareness and it's your other awareness.
Hmm.
So, if you're going to need to get some information, it may be that you have to create a relationship where you can get that information. You just can't come right in and demand it, you see.
Hmm.
So, the employee development piece allows you to learn how to do things like that. Or let's say you have to work with other team members around this whole topic.
Hmm. Hmm.
What are your particular um, personal biases, et cetera, when you're working with a team? And all of that is part of employee development. It's where they start to really develop self-awareness. How are they interfacing with the task? How are they working with other individuals within their organization? How are they communicating,
Hmm.
et cetera?
Okay.
So it's just very different than just straight up training.
Then following the manual, because at times there's
Yes.
no procedural manual on employee interaction.
No, exactly. And it absolutely, it's different than the manual. Anything, how do I want to say, anything that is procedural, protocol,
Hmm.
policy, that's training.
Right.
Um, anything that is, product brochure, for instance, is
Hmm. Hmm.
training. All the rest of it is development.
Okay.
So,
So if we're to kind of move to an area, training
mhm.
development, that sometimes I think it gets a little convoluted when working with sales staff.
Yes, yes,
We're going
that's a
to
really good
train our
example.
salespeople. We will train you.
Mhm.
And we go back to this is what our product does. Here's the brochure. And then you were you were telling me, one case kind of working on that. We've heard the term oversold. You're
Yes,
overselling.
yes.
These terms of, well, we like to develop a relationship with our customers. What does that mean, right?
Yeah, yep, yep.
All of these all of these terms that are flying around, that are floating around out there.
Mhm.
Where do some of these things, you oversold, what does it mean by developing a relationship with our clients? How does that kind of play into
Yep,
development and training?
yep, yep, and I wanna, by the way, have you, just make note of this later on in our conversation. I do wanna talk about too why people who have great training and skill sets sometimes don't make it as managers or leaders. So,
Ooh,
I wanna I just thought of that, so I think that's something we wanna add to the mix here, but,
okay.
let's go with this next piece of it, which is taking an example of sales training.
Okay.
So, sales training, often involves, understanding, a sales script.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It often it has to do with what is the product, what is it that we're selling, what's the service that we're providing, what is the product that we're selling. So the
Okay.
training often goes along with that. How do you work the CRM, there's a lot of how to with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, but when you are developing a sales staff, now
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about how is this individual actually interfacing with the sales role?
Hmm.
So here's an example, and we can actually assess this with one
Okay.
of the assessment tools I use. But it might be something like this. So I might be somebody who is very transactional. And what I mean by transactional is I ask for the sale right away.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want this or don't you? Okay, next. Do you want this or no? Don't you? Next. And I'm exaggerating. I'm
Sure. Sure.
exaggerating, but exaggerating only to make a point. It's called being very transactional. Well, there's a lot of other steps and processes that go into a sale. So it might
Mhm.
be, you develop the relationship, you field the questions about the product, you try to understand where your customer's coming from. When you have a full understanding of that, then you ask for the sale. So it's a procedure, it's a process. And
Hmm.
along the way, depending on where you are with your own people development, with your own personal development, you
Hmm.
could get caught up. You can run into a glitch.
Okay.
So what I mean by that would be, let's say you're a person who's really good at developing those early relationships. You're just easy to talk to. You're
Okay.
easy to connect with somebody, and so you're spending a lot of time there. And in fact, there can be a lot of energy there for a lot of people. Just the phase of getting to know people, chatting with them, and all of that.
Okay.
Um, Sometimes they just stay there, and they 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 stay there for a lot of reasons, but one of them might be, now I have a nice relationship. If I ask for the sale, what if it's rejected?
Mm.
Now that relationship feels like it's been rejected. So in other
Ah.
words, we've just chatted about, your favorite football team, and we've chatted about, all numbers of things, and you feel like you kind of know the guy, and
Right.
then you say, "Oh, by the way, I'm selling this, and that. Are you interested?" And they say no. There's a reason why people get out of sales, because they feel like they've been personally rejected,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So with development, you can start to understand where you are with that piece of it. So you can say, I'm having these conversations,
Hmm.
um, and I'm going to now move toward talking about my product. If they say no, I'm going to understand that I do tend to be a sensitive person, so I may take that personally. But then you can develop strategies so you don't take that personally.
Oh.
Or you can be a person who's in there and you're having those conversations and all of that, and that individual just really isn't interested in your product, but you still are persisting with, you know, 30-minute conversations on the phone because you're such a nice person. You don't have the heart to say, okay, I got to go, and then get to your next call. You see,
Oh, yeah.
because you don't have you don't have any awareness of when is it time to cut that off,
And how to cut it off? Do I
and
understand?
how to cut it off, and
Okay.
how to not feel crushed that you've had to cut it off. Okay,
Oh,
so those are development things. So
okay.
um, yeah, because we're human first and
Right.
foremost, and so we're wired to connect with people. So it feels weird to have all these conversations and then
Hmm.
either cut it off and say, okay, you know what, I'm done giving you the free advice, or whatever,
Okay.
whatever it is, and
Right.
I need to move to the next thing. So there's a lot of nuanced development that goes with those kinds of conversations.
So it
Uh,
almost seems like a clearing of the air of, or I should say, the definition of the word relationship, right?
yeah,
There's a
yeah,
business relationship, which is where I'm
yeah,
assuming we really kind of want to go with our prospective client to be a customer.
right.
Excuse me. And then there's the personal, too much of that personal relationship. Like you said, where do I cut this thing off?
Yep.
I mean, I found out about his kids, if he's got grandkids, the grandkids. I found
Right,
out
right.
we both went, to, I know that I can't talk about University of Michigan because I'm an Ohio State fan, and we kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
jab
Yeah,
each other,
yeah.
and I know his birthday and blah, 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 blah. That's a great relationship, man.
Yep,
So if he says no, he
yep.
has said no to, I revealed so much of my personal self to this person,
Right,
and
right.
saying no to my product. And I mean, am I getting it? I drug my product into this thing,
Yep, yep,
right?
yep, yep. So, yeah, so learning about that, or you can be on that other side of it too, where you do none of this conversation and you
Mm.
can't understand why it is that people cut you off and don't want to talk to you, because maybe you're Mr. Hard Sell, the guy with the watches in his coat, or
I had to make a living in college somehow, some way.
yeah, this is, oh
I
yeah, or the Fuller Brush man or whatever.
Again, I had to make a living in college.
Right, right,
No.
right. But that's what the personal development thing is. So, I could give you an example of
Hmm.
a really large. company that I worked for that was franchisers
Oh,
of pest control. So they're one of
okay.
the top pest control um, companies in the world. And so we, my a partner and I were working with this company to do leadership development. So
Mhm.
they didn't come to learn more about bugs. They didn't learn to, come. They didn't. We went. This was a retreat in the Dominican Republic, but they didn't
Wow.
come to learn about bugs. They didn't. They didn't do that. What they came to learn was how they could be better leaders in
Mm,
their organization. And that
okay.
is a people development thing. And that has huge impact on how successful an organization can be. And so this larger company recognized how important the people development piece of all of this was. It wasn't just about the brochures and the chemicals and the procedures. It
Mhm,
was
mhm,
about how do you interact with customers? How do you empathetically learn about how they feel about using something on
mhm,
their a product in their house when they have small children. So
mhm.
becoming
Okay.
a good listener and understanding that and having empathy and all of that. So it was
Okay.
really an interesting sort of thing.
So that almost kind of transitions into, as you said, the leadership development piece. If
Yes.
if someone is good at a task,
Yep.
they do the procedure really well. People ask them a lot of questions on the procedure.
Yep.
Sometimes it seems natural that when there's an opening for a leadership position, the technically sound person now should assume the role of the new leader,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Why do sometimes these types of leaders fail? When they're so technically sound, but
Right.
they fail at leadership. They knew the procedures. People respected them. They asked them questions.
Right.
What the heck
Right.
happened?
Yeah, yeah, that's a that's a really good question, and you see it a lot in multiple industries where
Mhm,
the individual um, is technically very, very good at something.
mm,
So, let's say they are super good at IT, and
right.
they get because of that skill set, they're either put in a management or leadership position. But
Mhm,
after that, they're not supported because they know their technical skill set, but their people skill set has not been developed. So they
mm,
don't know how to create engagement, for instance, within their
okay.
staff. They don't know how to lead them. They don't know how to identify strengths and blind spots in their
Oh,
staff in order that they can coach them to be better team members. The list is long of all the things that can go wrong when you promote somebody just based on technical expertise, because leadership as a development thing, it falls into the development category and not in the how to category.
okay. So they
So,
may, well, and then again, they may not be that strong in
right.
the how-to
Yep.
category.
Yep.
You could even take that a little bit. How come somebody who's so technically sound in this, procedure
Yeah.
wise, when we want them to train someone, for some reason, the people we send them to train never seem to get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They can't transfer that knowledge. Is that I'm technically sound at
Yep.
doing this
Yep.
process? Do I have a lack of development, communication development on how do I communicate my
Yes.
knowledge to someone else? How do I
Ye-
know when they're getting it or not getting it?
Yes, exactly. All of those things fall into development. So when you're developing a leader, in fact, if you look at the emotion the gold standard for emotional intelligence is this thing called the EQI 2.0, and they have a leadership report, as a matter of
Okay.
fact. Okay, and one of the key components in being an effective leader is your ability to coach others. And
Mm,
that is not just telling them what to do. That's not what coaching is, but it's their ability to bring out the best in somebody else. All right. And that's what
Mm,
leaders have to have, that capability. In order to bring out the best in somebody else, you have to have not only some self knowledge, but some knowledge about how somebody else might see something. And you got to be able to make that,
mhm.
bridge that in order to create effective leadership. So that's one of the things that's actually on the gold standard for emotional intelligence for leadership is the ability to coach.
Okay.
So
So all right. So it's that ability to coach, part of that development. So, so let me kind of come back to that question you had
right, right.
earlier.
Hmm.
You know, why do at times then really good sales trainers
Yep.
not succeed to the level that anticipation at being a salesperson themselves?
Yeah, yeah, because they may know the product,
Hmm.
they may know the procedures,
Right.
they may know what works for them. So I mean, I'm sure you've seen, sales trainers that say, "This is what you do. You call 100 people and you just barrel through that list. You just get on the phone and you just do it. And you
Mhm.
follow the script and that's how you do it." And they're successful that way because for some reason that particular
Mhm.
way of doing it works for them. But you give it to somebody else who is a different personality,
Right.
and they get de-energized by doing 20 cold calls that follow somebody else's procedure and script,
Right.
and all of a sudden you see them avoiding even making those calls, right? And
Hmm.
then
Hmm.
people start saying things, "Oh, they're lazy, they're unambitious, they're this, they're that." Well, they may just be it's just they may not have enough self-awareness on how to do that successfully. They may not have enough strategies, they may not have enough self-awareness. They may be very, very, very shy about making some of these phone calls. So,
Hmm.
a person who has a sharp eye for people development might say,
Hmm.
perhaps this person has to rehearse a few times before he's ready to go.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
So, versus somebody who has no eye for how people need to be developed might say, just go do it.
Right.
20 phone calls by 10 a.m. Just do it. You know,
It's kind of like having Michael Jordan train,
right.
players. Step one, you jump really high.
Yeah,
Right.
well, you know what? You actually bring up a really good point because not everybody who has been successful
Hmm.
in a sport can coach the sport
Mm.
because they don't necessarily have the development skills to bring out the best in somebody else. They only know what works for them.
Hmm. So sometimes your best player may not be your best leader, and sometimes
Yes.
your best
Yes.
player performer might not be your best leader.
Right. That's correct.
And so really it kind of they tap out at their own potential. As good as they
That's
personally are, they can't transition that over. But sometimes, Anne, haven't we kind of seen that, like you just gave the example? We've seen that salesperson who was average,
right.
right? But they had those wonderful people. We call them people skills, right?
Yes.
And they're able to kind of transfer that knowledge, kind of that like you just said, they can show the procedure. This is how you fill out the CRM. This is how you take
Right.
the
Right.
online order. This is how you schedule the call. This is the product knowledge. Now
Yep.
let's talk a little bit about business relationship and personal relationship. you know
Yes.
Being able to kind of look, know when to cut off
Yep.
the personal relationship, that you're developing with someone. They may
Right.
not care about that.
Right.
Don't ask questions blindly.
Right.
Listen a skill on knowing what question am I doing okay, am I getting it.
Right, right.
Watch and watch and listen to the reply you're getting to some of these the questions that you're answering.
Mhm.
And that's a rare find. That part really needs work in developing someone to be able to do that. Is that right?
That's correct, that's correct. And the nicest thing about the development piece is it is something that you can just get better and better and better at
Hmm.
something. Another layer I wanna talk about too is, that if you have limited self-awareness,
Mm.
you might also fall prey to things like triggers. Let's say
Ooh,
you're in a, I know we're talking in sales, but this can happen in any,
anything.
in anything. But let's say, just because we're using sales as an example.
Right.
So you are working with somebody, you worked really, really hard to, send him the brochures and lay it all out for him. And then he basically says no, and he says no in a way that reminds you of the way your father used to talk to you,
Ah, nice.
you know?
Right.
So, somebody who's not triggered and realizes, "Oh gosh, that sure sounded like my father," deep breath, might say, "Okay," they might start asking questions. What are your main objections?" Or something
Mhm.
like that. In other words, they're gonna bring them back into conversation about that product. But if they are triggered and they're not aware of the fact that they are triggered by this kind of thinking,
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
might be like, "That jerk, I just spent all that time putting that brochure together for him, and he acted like he was interested, and rah, 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 rah," you can go on and be so angry about it, not even realizing that half of the anger you're directing at this guy may in fact just be because he reminds you of somebody. He's
Mm.
triggered you.
Okay.
So, part of development is
Mhm. Mhm.
understanding what those triggers are and what to do about it so it doesn't derail you.
Okay. All right. So, if there's a real lack of development of awareness, what
Mm.
can that do to the environment?
You mean climate change? Are you talking about
Awesome.
the No, I'm
Excellent,
kidding.
Ann. That was a three-pointer from the corner. I like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
one. To our
What
workplace environment, if
Yes, 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 yes. Right. Yeah, I knew what you meant. I just couldn't help myself. Um, so what it can do is really create you've heard the term toxic environment. It can
Mm,
really create a difficult working environment, if a person is not self-aware. I had a client once who was had a lot of industry knowledge. He actually has been working with the company, let's see, nearly 50 years.
oh,
Yeah,
wow.
maybe really 45, but same company. He started when he was in high school. The company was owned by his neighbor, so he started in high school and he's been with
Okay.
the company his entire working life. Okay, and he is his industry knowledge,
Mhm.
his how-to knowledge is second to none,
Mm,
right?
okay.
But when he came to me, he was close to being fired. And he was being close to being fired because of his personal skills.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
instead of writing, a straight up email, he'd pepper it with all kinds of sarcasm and, you know, uh, 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 he was awful, you know, and he wasn't really aware of the impact this was actually having on the people that he's supposed to be a resource for. So if he's got the most industry knowledge
Right.
and he is therefore the best resource in the entire company,
Mhm.
you as that person do not want to make it difficult for people to come to you for that
Mm,
information, right?
okay. Right.
And if you aren't aware that your emails, for instance, are offensive, or that if that person comes in to ask you a question, that they're going to get this rude remark or
Right.
this, didn't I tell you already? Or, anything that's going to be unproductive, right?
Sarcasm. Yeah.
Sarcasm, things like that.
Okay.
And so this is what he had to work on is, yes, you have the most industry knowledge. You're therefore a real resource, but you're
Mhm.
not a resource if people can't come up to you and have a conversation.
Okay.
And so the development piece, this is what he lacked, was the development piece. He didn't lack training. He didn't
Mhm.
lack knowledge. He didn't lack any of that. He was the most trained individual in that entire company, but he was on the verge of losing his job because of these interpersonal skills that he needed to work on. His personal development
Hmm.
is what saved his job.
Okay. So then, Anne, could the same thing be said about someone who's a little too talkative?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Wonderful.
yes.
Great person.
Yes.
I got a quick question for you.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
what happens?
Yes. It's like, yeah, I don't want to go in and ask the question because I might be in there for 20 minutes. And
At
so,
least.
at least, and so I might divert and
Uh-huh.
just try to either A, figure it out myself or just not deal with it, because if you go in to ask that person that simple question, it might be a 20-minute conversation. So you
Mm-hmm.
can say, well, you can say as a manager, well, just tell the guy to stop talking.
You talk too much.
Yeah, you talk too much, just answer the question or whatever. If that person doesn't have any self-awareness around that, he's just going to go back to that habit. He has to
Mm,
understand the implications. He has to understand, not only do I talk too much, but it makes a big difference as to whether or not somebody's going to come in and use me as a resource and ask me a question or
mhm,
inform me of something or communicate something to me. Because when
mm,
I go in, I mean, we all know people, when you go in to the, you go, well, I can't call that person now because I don't have 45 minutes,
right,
that kind
right.
of thing. So, and that's no, and you know what, by the way, I want to be really clear
Mhm,
that that is not, that's not a human flaw at all. It's nice
okay.
to be a conversational individual. It's just that you need to develop self-awareness around how much conversation to have at any given moment. And you need skills around that. And that's where the development piece comes in.
Okay. Because you said something I thought very interesting. The talkative person almost starts to get isolated. And of course,
Yes.
if they're talkative, that's
Yes.
energy to them. So now we're starting to move around them. I can't get a quick answer to my quick question because I'm in
Right.
there for at
Right.
least 20 minutes. Or if I go in there, we'll call this person Bob, right?
Yeah.
So if I go into Bob and Bob's a talkative guy, and it's one of those quick things. Hey, Bob, I just wanted to let you know that something has changed or something's coming up. And
Yep.
Bob, again, draws you into this conversation. You start moving around Bob. Now, he's not getting any information. He's not getting any questions. And then he's
Right.
wondering, why didn't anyone ever tell me this?
Yeah,
Right. And then
exactly.
we're working with the manager who says, well, just tell him to shut up. So, so then the manager steps in. Bob, sometimes you just don't know when to shut up.
Yeah, and then Bob feels very bad, and
Of
and all
course.
of that. All well, and you know what, you can have. I mean, let's get past the guy who talks too much. How about the person who is a super, like a stickler? So
Mm,
that if you come in and you say, there's something that's strange about this shipment, we can't seem to figure out, what's going wrong with that,
mm-hmm.
and you go in there and you're just gonna get read the riot act for a minor mistake,
Right.
rather than that guy actually helping you, like, "Oh gosh, well, have you looked at this?" Or, what, or ask some questions to try to get some clarity. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're afraid to go in there because you're gonna get read the riot act,
Mm-hmm.
for being incompetent, or
Mm,
that person always has to, take care of everything because you screw up so often or whatever. Basically, you end up having difficult you have difficult, it starts to crack at the ability for the team to work
mm,
well together. It starts to have it starts to have a huge impact on people working together because they're encountering
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
some of these characters when they go in for, for help. So, um or you might be a person who is, you know you tend to avoid any kind of conflict. So something, next to you is falling
Mm-hmm.
apart, but boy, you just don't want the experience of going in and having to tell somebody it's not going well. So you
Right.
just you just smooth it over and wait for it to get better. These are all
In
what
hopes
I'm
it
talking.
does.
Yeah, yeah, and these are all development things I'm talking about. And we've come up with story after story and angle after angle that this is all development. This has nothing to do with training.
you know, and now some of the things that you're saying about the communication, we've got the different personalities
Yeah,
we've
yep,
covered. I- Is there any relationship with employee development?
yes.
Does the employee development have an impact at all on the employee training?
Absolutely, absolutely. You get way more out of your employee training if you have employee development because the training people start making mistakes if they're not engaged. If,
Hmm.
let's say here's an example. Let's say there is I'm going to use a hospital example if that's okay.
Sure.
So let's say that there is, a patient has fallen out of bed and there's a
Hmm.
protocol that you have to follow to um, document that that happened, right?
Okay.
So but if you're a person who is afraid of your manager,
Mm.
that if you report that this person fell out of bed and you're
Hmm.
afraid to report that to your manager, you might look at them and go, well, they got right back up, they're probably fine, thank God,
Right.
and
Let's
just
hope.
la 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 la, God, I hope that didn't happen, right? And I use that but think of any industry when
Sure.
something happens, and if and there's some sort of procedure or protocol you're supposed to do to document it or to report it, but you're afraid of the person you're reporting it to or what that could mean, now you're in a whole different realm.
Yeah.
That's a development question, you know.
Mm.
Are you as the manager, for
Hmm.
instance, receptive to the conversation that something went wrong? And are you, as the employee, feeling comfortable and not getting caught up in your own head coming to report that information to the manager? I mean, you can see it can go both ways. And
Yeah.
anytime you have improved employee development, the training and the follow through on training is greatly enhanced.
Okay.
And by the way, another way that can happen too is that if you have you've developed your employees really really well, they
Hmm.
also start to help each other out in
Okay.
areas that you may be a little deficient on, but you're not you've got enough self-awareness to be able
Hmm.
to say, "Hey, I might need somebody to help me close this deal. I might need somebody to help me make sure I'm following this procedure." So you
Right.
get if you have people that are self-aware, you have people that'll work better together and then apply the training in the maximum way.
Okay. So people through the development process understand one another. But
Right.
before understanding one another, they have to have a little bit of awareness of themselves.
That's correct.
You know, you know, if you were to say something to me, deny, my idea, but you denied it, like my mom or my dad, I have to realize you're not my mom, you're not my dad.
Yeah,
Therefore, I do not hate you.
exactly. Exactly, exactly,
Right?
exactly.
You
Yeah,
just hate
yeah.
the idea.
Yes, yes, yes. And yeah, and so you have to have some awareness about yourself, what tends to trigger you, what you're really
Hmm.
good at, what your blind spot might be, what you might need help with.
Hmm.
If you let's say you're not good at details and you say to somebody, maybe I'm going to have somebody double check my details, and
Right.
then you go into a coworker
Hmm.
and you say, are these details okay? If that coworker is self-aware, they know that's their strength. If they're
Hmm.
other aware, they know that's not your strength. And then they'll say, here, yeah, I'll look at it. Oh, we just missed one thing here. Okay, you have a nice conversation. The product, the training is good. You're off you go. But
Hmm.
if you are defensive, like I'm fine with details, and you hand in something that's not correct,
Right.
or you go in and that person says, here you are again, you're so sloppy, I don't even know why you still work here, things like that. I mean, we laugh about this stuff, but it goes on all the time.
Well,
It
we
goes
laugh
we go
about
on.
it, Ann, because it sounds like you read one of my former employee reviews
Oh,
that someone gave me.
oh really, oh really, do tell.
Yeah, Mike's not the most detailed individual, uh,
Okay.
and his handwriting could kill someone if he were a doctor. But
Yeah, 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 yeah.
so, from kind of what I'm understanding, what you're saying here, Ann,
Yep,
is
yep.
that our most technically sound but least engaged employee when it comes to development communication may find it really, really difficult to rally the troops,
That's correct.
right?
And
And,
lead them and
lead
develop
them.
and get the
Um,
most out of their staff.
and at times, I think even experience that we've worked with numerous companies before, but the experience then being if the technically sound person
Right.
can't seem to rally the support of the other employees,
That's
they
correct.
wind up doing it themselves.
They do. Yes, they do.
Then they become overloaded,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Um, and that leads to, an environment that can become,
Mhm.
very toxic. No
Yes,
one's working together.
that's
Everyone's kind of
correct.
trying to figure out day to day how they can make it through themselves.
Yep.
So, and to kind of tie this thing together, you know, what are the ways that we can kind of work with staff between development and training? Are there a couple of ways that we can kind of do this?
Yes, yes. So, very specifically,
Hmm.
the training, obviously, you want to have your procedures, your manuals, your brochures, all of that stuff. You want to have that nice and clear. That will take
Hmm.
you a long way with training. Then, what you want to do is do at least some basic development of your staff.
Hmm.
So, very specifically, do those individuals know their strengths and blind spots? A
Hmm.
simple personality assessment. I use the MBTI and Type Coach. A simple
Right.
personality assessment will go a long way towards starting to illuminate what those strengths and blind spots are. And
Okay.
not because they give somebody an excuse for not doing something well. What it
Hmm.
does is it gives them an awareness so that they can do a little bit better on it or partner with somebody about doing better on something. So
Hmm.
a
Okay.
personality assessment will go a long way to just doing strengths and blind spots. Another thing that's very helpful is if you
Hmm.
can do some sort of group team development in which they
Okay.
understand others in their group, what their strengths are, what their blind spots, et cetera. How do
Okay.
they like to be communicated with? How do they like their feedback?
Hmm. Hmm.
Things like that. Those are two very specific things, and they're not. They're pretty basic, but really important for development.
Good. Good. And by the way, for those who are watching or listening, I've experienced firsthand and working with me. She took me through the type coach assessment and pointed out some strengths, pointed out some things, potential blind spots, how to work through them, what to be aware of. I've
Yes.
seen her do it with some other clients. They thought it was great. You know,
Yeah.
it, you know, this isn't, the typical, so your favorite color is, therefore,
Right.
this
Right.
was some really, really good information that she's provided me. A couple of clients that we do share, that we do a few coaching, a few clients, organizations that we work together with. I've seen firsthand, I've gotten reports back from the owners, the phenomenal job that Ann has done with the group coaching and the one-on-one leadership development phase. She's not talking from from a theoretical position. She's talking from practical, doing the work position that she's had and the real life results that she has gotten. So, Anne, fantastic. I always walk away with more in discussions than I think what you get from these. Thank you so much for being with us. Um, Folks, if you want to, have any additional questions for Anne or any additional comments, I think Anne, she would also be open to providing you a free consultation, a 30-minute free consultation, and you can get a hold of Anne at Temple Executive Coaching. Anne, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, one really important one is Ann has no E. So it's ANN, a Temple of
Okay,
Executive Well, it's amazing,
I'm with you.
that's a big deal. I really got shortchanged with only 3 letters in my name, but
All right.
there's no E in it. So
No,
Ann at
and
Temple
those of you who are
Executive Coaching.
watching, I'm going to put her email address somewhere around here. But those who
Okay,
are
good, good,
listening,
good.
it is ANN at
Yes.
Temple Executive Coaching.
Yes, yes. So yeah, and I'm happy to provide a free consultation because there's so much that we can explore. You know, what would be recommended is based on what are your main
Mhm.
things that you're experiencing. What would you like to see more of? What would you like to see that, better? So, and
Absolutely.
we can dig through that in a consultation.
Terrific.
So,
All
all right.
right. Thank you so much. And
All
thanks
right.
so much for listening. Look forward to
Yes.
talking to you guys again soon.
Okay.
Bye.